Web of Lies, Chapter 3, Stranded.
The journey had been frightening to both engines at first, but an hour in it was more boring than anything. Thomas, as creative as he was, had found a way of combating this. "I spy with my little eye something deft," Diesel gritted, his teeth fused together in disdain, because that's what each one of these has been. Deft. "Oh, come on, why don't you just play along? It'll be less boring that way."
"I don't get bored."
"Oh, you must get bored."
"I don't. I don't seek stimulation like you overeager steam engines. I just use my downtime to renew myself and to develop strategies. Diesels do not feel boredom."
Daisy would disagree with you. She's desperate for He cut his losses. She likes when things happen. She likes when things happen, particularly when passengers pay attention to her.
"Your point?"
"Well, there are at least some diesels that get bored."
"Then they're defective."
Not a hint of irony or doubt in his voice. His worldview must have seemed so concrete to him. The journey continued in awkward silence. Every time Thomas came back to the mainland, which wasn't very often, he was struck by how enormous everything was. It made his little island feel quaint, and, to be frank, he felt a little emasculated. Gordon always boasted that everything was bigger and grander in England proper. As he put it, every station was a terminus, and every railway line rode on a viaduct, high above the towns they served, so everyone could see the trains. Now Thomas knew that was absurd. He had lived in England a long time ago, and he could confirm that not everything was on a viaduct. And yet, as they coasted through the city, 50 feet above street level on one of the longest, widest, grandest viaducts Thomas had ever ridden atop, he had to at least second guess if Gordon was right. At least in Manchester, everything was on a viaduct, and it was undeniably impressive. They soared past what must have been the big railway station, with 4 huge glass canopies of various sizes. It was light enough now that Thomas could see the morning passenger trains finding their platforms. They were all in such modern colors, and the coaches looked almost futuristic compared to what Sodor was still using. All of these trains were headed by diesels, of course. Thomas liked diesels, despite Devious Diesel giving them such a rotten name. It had never really mattered to him that they were big and boxy or ran on oil instead of coal. It was all pretty trivial to him. He felt the urge to say hello. But he had to remind himself. This was the mainland. Things were different here. He hadn't been here since the 50s. Steam engines were still allowed here back then. Thomas shuddered. He wasn't allowed here. It was very lucky for both engines that Thomas's driver had left his brakes off for a quick getaway, and Diesel's driver had been so thoughtless that he hadn't even bothered to put them on in the first place. Thanks to these two facts, both engines still had round wheels by the time they reached Manchester. Both engines were grateful when the train finally pulled into the goods yard, which, shockingly, was not on top of a viaduct. They were in dire need of a rest. Thomas's driver and fireman, on the other hand, were very well rested indeed. Maxine lay slumped clumsily over a large parcel, and Marcel was nestled comfortably in a pile of mailbags. They both jolted awake when Henry stopped the train. Maxine scratched her head, and then looked at her watch with sleepy eyes. "Well, would you look at that? 8 o'clock. It's like when a normal person starts work." Marcel leaped up immediately and dusted themselves off, shaking stamps and sleep from their body as they did so. "How long were we out?" "Seems like just enough," Maxine said coolly. "Now, I've got a story to tell the fellows up front." But Marcel thumbed back to the locked sorting room. "What about our, prisoner?" But the prisoner answered that question for them, when they heard an unmistakable slide and thump. Then something thudded into the ballast outside. "Are there windows in there?" asked Maxine in panic. There were, and now that they were halted, the maniacal engine man had seized his opportunity. Before Thomas's crew could do anything, he had run along the train and heaved the couplings apart, freeing up the 3 mail vans. Then he dashed back to his diesel, hopped in, and started the engine. A touch on the starter, and he was hurling the coaches backwards. Marcel and Maxine had just managed to pry the door open when the train lurched. They were in the middle of disembarking and were nearly thrown clear of the vehicle. Thankfully, both were thrown back inside the train. Maxine hollered from the floor of the mail car, enraged. "He's insane! He could have killed us!" That, of course, just lit a fire under her ass. She leaped down for the moving vehicle and just barely managed to outrun the Diesel, an embarrassing commentary on his top speed. Thomas, Diesel, and the mail train were pulling further and further away from the rest of the train. Maxine just barely reached her engine in time, scaled the steps in one fluid, determined motion. Marcel was not far behind, though considerably less athletic in their movements. So Thomas's driver and fireman stumbled into his cab. There was no way in hell that they could get steam up in time. But the brakes still worked. Screech! Thomas's wheels yelled out as Diesel pushed back against him with all his might. Whereas before he'd been gaining yards every second, now he was only gaining inches.
"Let me go! I've got to get these vans clear of the yard before—"
But the powerful whistle of a Black 5, or something vaguely resembling one, cut them both off. Henry had decoupled from the train and was now approaching both of them on his way to the sheds. Thomas grew hopeful. "Henry, help me! This maniac is—" But Diesel banged him hard.
"Silence! This operation has been in motion for months. I will not allow you to jeopardize it."
And his wheels kept spinning fiercely. It was then that Thomas had a devilish and very clever idea. "Oh, driver, would you let the brake off, please?" "What?" She was aghast. "Just do it," insisted Thomas, "and do it fast." So she swung the lever with all the force of a Major League Baseball player, and Thomas's wheels went from lock to free in a split second. All of Diesel's wasted effort was suddenly put to use in breaking the mail car's coupling. "Aye!" he cried effeminately as the chain link disintegrated, and he and Thomas flew backwards, leaving the cars far behind. They flew around the bend and sped towards a locked goods shed. Diesel's driver saw the oncoming building and panicked. Diesel's door flew open, and the oily engine operator barreled out the side of the cab, rolling to a stop in the dirt. With one guilty look back at his engine, he made a break for it, scurrying away into the town. "Coward!" cried Diesel in outrage, and the two engines blasted through a sheet metal door, burying themselves in the once locked goods shed. The padlock had stood no chance.
"Oh dear,"
murmured Henry as he approached. He was about to peer around the corner to see what had happened, when he came across the unexpected rolling stock.
"Percy's mail? Did I bring this?"
He rolled his eyes. What a stupid question. How else would it have gotten here?
"Oh my goodness, what a mix-up. I'd better take these back."
Though he was discouraged when he saw the state of the buffer beam.
"The coupling's been torn straight out."
And then he chuckled to himself, remembering,
To be young again. No matter. I'll just use my end."
And that's exactly what he did. Hitching his own chain link onto the 3 vans and hauling them to the other side of the yard, marshalling them in with his return goods. He did not hear Diesel's desperate whimpers from the darkness of the shed under his crumpled aluminum blanket.
"No, no, no."
It was half tears and half spite.
"I was so close. And you infernal blue kettle, you've ruined it all."
But then, to Diesel's amazement, steam erupted from behind him, whooshing past his access panels and blowing out the front of the shed. He then began to grind forward slowly. The ruined door that lay atop his bonnet kept most of his black paint for itself. Thomas practically tossed Diesel out into the open and wheeshed him with hot steam again. Thomas's crew had not abandoned him like Diesel's had. Throughout all the commotion, Marcel had been hard at work building the fire. Yes, once upon a time, they may have been an accountant, but now that they'd been at this fireman thing for a few years, they were the best in the business. After all, the Fat Controller would have selected nobody lesser to steam his #1 engine. "I've ruined it all," Thomas responded at last, almost chuckling at Diesel's audacity. "I think I've stopped you from ruining it all. Just what did you intend to do with all those mail cars anyway?"
"You wouldn't understand it if I told you," the Diesel sniffed. "It's beyond your comprehension."
Thomas just scoffed at the pretentious comment. It was nothing new from this guy. Well, it's been foiled now, whatever your plan was. Now, we'd better catch Henry before he... But at that moment, the mighty whistle sounded again, and this time it was followed up by the thunderous rhapsody of two great stand-your cylinders shifting 1,000 tons at once. There was no catching him, though it didn't stop Thomas trying. "We'll be stranded! Move, Diesel!" Diesel didn't bother. He sat perfectly still, mourning his perfect plan, whatever it had been.
"It's no use, tank engine. He'll be gone before you reach the mouth of the yard."
"How do you know?" questioned Thomas, wheels still spinning furiously.
"It's 1,300 meters to the signal gantry, taking into account both of our top speeds and the momentum that the mongrel has already picked up. We have exactly 11 seconds to reach him and get his attention. The fastest we can manage is 2 minutes."
"How did you—"
"And 31 seconds.
Thomas just blinked. He stopped spinning his wheels. He couldn't believe that all those numbers really meant something. A Diesel had to be blowing smoke. But he spoke with such conviction. Could he really calculate such things?
"Yes,"
He startled Thomas, responding to a question he hadn't asked aloud.
"I am exceptional in mathematics."
"So he claims," thought Thomas. "So you claim," said Thomas. For you see, Thomas keeps few opinions to himself. "So we're stranded then?"
"Yes,"
said Diesel, seriously considering the situation for the first time.
"With no permission to be here, and no allies nearby. That is a problem."
He narrowed his eyes, thinking intently. And then he added,
"For you."
"Why me? We're both trespassing on BR."
"Hardly,"
scoffed Diesel.
"I have worked these rails for years. I may currently be a resident of Tidmouth, but I will always be welcome here on BR. But you—"
And his mouth twisted into a sneer that Thomas couldn't see being behind him.
"They'll eat you alive."
Thomas's boiler ran cold. Imminent danger never seemed to register to him as quickly as it did to other engines. It's why he was covered in spot welds and 7 different shades of touch-up paint. He recalled the dark stories his friend, perhaps more aptly frenemy, Stepney had first told him about the other railway, and what a terrible place it was to be a steam engine, and the many, many horrible stories he had heard in the years that followed. All engines like him had been cut into pieces and smelted down 2 decades ago. Since then, barring a few small pockets of sanctuary scattered across the country, this entire railway had been unfriendly to steam engines. And that was putting it lightly. He imagined how they'd rejoice in capturing the poster boy for steam. What a victory that would be for the scrap merchants. "You're right," he agreed gravely. "I can't let myself be seen. They'll take me away for sure, and nobody even knows where I am."
"Indeed."
A thoughtful silence followed this, and then,
"However, if I escort you home, you may live to see your precious Farquhar again."
Thomas's jaw dropped. All the sand fell out of his boxes. His fireman threw down the shovel in frustration and marched into the yard for more. "You would do that for me? Seriously?"
"Why so surprised? Do you think that little of me?"
"Well, yeah. Perhaps it's more apt to say Thomas keeps no opinion to himself. You've never done anything for me."
"I helped you up the hill that one time, didn't I? When I visited your branch?"
Yeah, I guess you did." Thomas recalled the memory. It was a strange few weeks having Diesel on the Farquhar roster. It almost hadn't felt real.
"Then you know I'm capable of generosity. I may not like you, but my work is not done on Sodor."
"Oh, wow. Well, that doesn't sound ominous at all. I totally want to invite you back."
"You don't have a choice. And neither do I. If I returned without you, the fat controller would never forgive me."
"You think he wants you back after this mail car fiasco?"
"Oh, certainly not," agreed Diesel. "Which is why, in exchange for my assistance, you are not going to tell him."
Thomas sighed heavily. That was a tall ask, but it didn't look like he had many options. So he would cross that bridge after he had crossed the Vickerstown Bridge. "Fine. You got a deal."
"Good," said Diesel, almost sounding a bit relieved. "Then we make for Southampton."
Thomas's jaw dropped again. Marcel, who was a fast learner, plugged his sandpipes until he was done being surprised. "Have you ever seen a map?" asked the flabbergasted tank engine. "Or the name of our railway, for that matter?"
Diesel took great offense. "I have not just seen the map, I have memorized it, and that is how I know that the best route home is not by rail. It is by sea."
Oh no, Thomas shut his eyes and groaned loud and long. "I hate boats, I hate them."
"Your branch line ends in a harbor."
"Well, yeah, but I never go down there. Percy and I made a deal about that a long time ago. Me and water just don't mix."
"Care to elaborate?"
"No, actually," declared Thomas firmly. "Unpleasant memories." And he heaved another sigh. "Besides, Southampton is a dead end. It's where all my siblings ended up. I'd rather not get stuck there myself."
Diesel raised a tired eyebrow. "If you stop being so fickle about boats, you won't."
Thomas just warmed the ballast below him with another annoyed puff of steam. His options were slim. "Fine. If it's the fastest way home, I suppose I'll entertain it."
But Diesel corrected him. "Oh no, it's not the fastest, but it will be the safest."
Thomas considered this. It made less sense the more he thought about it. "But we're so much closer to Sodor than Southampton. We're going to be on the rails longer than if we just headed home."
"You don't know the regions like I do, Thomas. Yes, it's only a few hours home, but those hours are treacherous. Some of the most vicious diesels in England inhabit the Northwest. You are very lucky that we made the whole trip before daybreak."
I guess that makes sense. Thomas's mind still wouldn't let him accept it, though. But still, it's going to be such a long trip.
"And I know all the back roads. It will take a few days, but we'll get there unscathed."
Thomas was still deeply skeptical, but as unreliable as Diesel was, he was his only ally, which really did lay bare the severity of the situation. "Do you really think we could sneak across the whole country? Well, they'll need to make arrangements for us." Diesel sighed. This was the only part of the plan he regretted.
"Indeed. It won't be seamless. The schedule will suffer greatly. The entire network will experience major delays."
Thomas just scoffed. "Oh, okay, so like normal then."
Diesel hit him in the smoke box with a jet of angry black smog. "We do our best," he said defensively.
Even so, Thomas didn't regret the remark one bit. Fine. I guess I've got no choice. So, where's the first leg of our journey taking us?"
Diesel smiled vainly. "Why, the finest works in the world, of course."
And he said nothing more than that. As if it were obvious. If Gordon, Henry, or Duck were here, they'd all be shouting different names.